Their story so strange, so disturbing, that even decades later, no one dares to explain them. These are not legends. They are real, documented, witnessed, and still unsolved. Tonight, we uncover 3 true horror stories that blur the line between fact and nightmare. Story 1. The Dyatlov Pass Incident, 1959, Russia. It began like any other daring adventure. A group of 9 experienced hikers setting out into the icy wilderness of Russia's Ural Mountains in February 1959. They were young, full of life, laughter, and ambition. Their leader, Igor Dyatlov, was known for his discipline and determination, a man who planned every detail to perfection. Each member of the group had been tested by the harsh winters before. They were not reckless thrill seekers. They were trained mountaineers chasing the thrill of accomplishment and the beauty of nature's raw power. What they could never have known was that their journey would become one of the most chilling and perplexing mysteries in human history. One that still haunts the minds of investigators and storytellers decades later. The hike began smoothly, their journals filled with laughter, songs, and the everyday struggles of climbing through snow. The group even took photographs, capturing frozen smiles and the sense of unity that held them together. But as they pushed deeper into the mountains, the weather grew fierce. Blizzards cut visibility to almost nothing. Temperatures dropped below freezing, and winds howled like spirits whispering through the white expanse. They made camp on the slopes of Kolotsykel, a name that, in the local Monsey language, meant Mountain of the Dead. No one thought much of it then. It was just another mountain, another challenge to conquer. That night, something unimaginable happened. When rescuers arrived weeks later, the first thing they found was the group's tent, ripped open from the inside. Their belongings were still neatly arranged: boots, coats, food supplies, cameras. It looked as if the hikers had been forced to flee in the middle of the night, without any time to think or prepare. The tracks in the snow painted a picture of panic. Barefoot footprints leading down the slope, scattered and desperate, fading into the forest below. Some were wearing only socks, others barefoot, in temperatures cold enough to freeze skin within minutes. Whatever had driven them out of that tent, it was powerful enough to override the most basic human instinct of survival. The rescuers followed the tracks and found the first 2 bodies near a small fire under a large cedar tree. They were barefoot, dressed only in their underclothes, their hands burned, as if they had tried to pull flaming branches from the fire to stay alive. Nearby branches were broken several meters high, suggesting someone had tried to climb the tree, perhaps in search of safety or a better view of the camp. Then, one by one, more bodies were found scattered in the snow, some crawling back toward the tent, others deeper in the forest. It was as if the group had split up, trying to survive in their own desperate ways. By the time all 9 were discovered, the mystery had deepened into horror. Some bodies were found days later under several feet of snow, mutilated in ways that defied explanation. One had a fractured skull, another missing eyes, and one woman missing her tongue. Yet there were no external wounds consistent with violence or animal attacks. It was as if the injuries had been inflicted by immense internal pressure, like being crushed by something unseen. Even more disturbing was the eerie calm of the surroundings. No sign of avalanche. No footprints other than her own. No indication of an outside force. Just an empty, frozen landscape holding on to its dark secret. To this day, no one knows what caused the panic that night. Some say it was an avalanche. Others claim it was military experiments gone wrong. Or perhaps something more otherworldly. Something that watched them from the darkness as the storm howled. Whatever it was, it drove 9 intelligent, rational people into the freezing wilderness barefoot and terrified. Their laughter, once echoing to the mountains, was replaced by silence. A silence that still whispers through the snow of Dyatlov Pass, reminding us that nature and the unknown could be far more terrifying than any ghost story ever told. The summer of 1955 brought something strange to the quiet skies above Kelly, Kentucky. It was an ordinary evening at the Sodder farmhouse, a humble home surrounded by miles of farmland and silence. Inside were 11 people, most of them family, gathered around the dinner table after a long day. Laughter mixed with the sound of crickets and the chirping of night birds. But as dusk fell, a man named Billy Ray Taylor stepped outside to fetch water from a well. What he saw next would turn an ordinary night into one of the most terrifying encounters in American history. Billy Ray claimed he saw a bright, metallic object gliding silently through the evening sky before disappearing into nearby woods. At first, everyone laughed it off. They thought he had mistaken a shooting star for something else. Maybe he was tired, or his imagination was playing tricks. But Billy Ray insisted. His voice trembled as he described it. A silver disc, glowing faintly, moving without sound. The laughter soon faded when the family's dogs began barking, a deep, uneasy growl that made everyone freeze. Animals, after all, sense things humans can't. Moments later, the night turned eerily still. No wind, no crickets, no sound. Then, from the edge of the trees, something began to emerge. The family saw small figures, about 3 feet tall, with large glowing eyes and long, spindly arms that almost touched the ground. Their skin seemed to shimmer, reflecting the light from the farmhouse lamps. They weren't walking. They were gliding, moving with unnatural smoothness toward the house. The family later said it felt like the air itself had changed, thick and heavy, as if the world was holding its breath. Panic spread fast. The Suttons were country folk, strong, self-reliant, and armed. They grabbed their shotguns and rifles, determined to protect their home. As one of the creatures peeked through a window, they fired. The blast echoed across the fields, but instead of falling, the creature simply flipped backward, floated into the darkness, and vanished. Another appeared at the doorway, hands raised as if shielding its face, glowing eerily in the lamplight. They fired again. Same result. No blood, no sound, just a strange metallic ping, like bullets bouncing off a bucket. For the next several hours, the family endured what they described as a siege. The creature surrounded the house, tapping on windows, scratching the roof, and occasionally peering in with their enormous glowing eyes. Each time someone shot, the figures would fall back, only to return moments later, as if playing some kind of horrifying game. The children hid under the bed while the adults reloaded again and again, their fear growing with every sound outside. The only light came from the lamps flickering inside, and the moonlight glinting off the strange creature's skin. By dawn, the attacks had stopped. Exhausted and terrified, the family piled into their truck and raced to the local police station in Hopkinsville. The officers, at first skeptical, returned to the farmhouse with them, only to find shell casings scattered across the porch and strange metallic residues near the windows. Even more unsettling, the police themselves saw mysterious lights moving in the distance, low and silent across the horizon. In the days that followed, the incident made national headlines. Reporters flooded the town, and the Suttons became reluctant celebrities, their story mocked by some and believed by others. They gained nothing from it, no fame, no fortune, only ridicule and fear. Yet the sincerity in their voices, the detailed consistency of their accounts, and the physical evidence left behind left many investigators unsettled. To this day, the Kelly-Hopkinsville encounter remains one of the most credible close encounters ever documented. Was it a mass hallucination, a government experiment, or a real extraterrestrial visit? No one knows. But what still chills those who study it is the one detail the family kept repeating, those glowing, unblinking eyes at the window, staring in from the darkness, as if observing not with curiosity but with intent. The Hinterkaifeck murders began on a quiet, snow-covered farm deep in the Bavarian countryside, a place that seemed peaceful from the outside but held a growing sense of unease within. The Gruber family lived there, far from the nearest village, surrounded by dense woods and endless fields. Life at Hinterkaifeck was simple, isolated, and routine. Andreas Gruber, the father, was known to be stern and withdrawn, while his wife, Kazilia, spent most of her days tending to the home. Their widowed daughter, Victoria, lived with them along with her 2 children. It should have been a picture of rural calm. But in the months before their deaths, the Grubers began to notice things that didn't make sense. It started with small oddities, noises in the attic late at night, the sound of slow footsteps when no one else was awake. Andreas believed at first it might be animals, but the sounds were too deliberate, too human. Then one morning, as snow blanketed the ground, Andreas noticed a single line of footprints leading from the forest straight to the farmhouse. What made it chilling was that there were no footprints leading back. Whoever came in had never left. He searched every room, climbed into the attic, checked the barns and sheds, but found nothing. Days later, the family discovered a newspaper from Munich lying on the kitchen table. No one had bought it, and no one in the area subscribed to it. Their keys went missing next, followed by strange creaks in the floorboards and faint whispers echoing through the empty halls at night. The neighbors shrugged off these tales, thinking Andreas was exaggerating or losing his mind. After all, Hinterkaifeck was known to be an eerie place. Its isolation and distance from town made it a perfect breeding ground for superstition. But what the family didn't know was that these were not signs of imagination. They were warnings. Someone was already inside their home, watching, waiting, and moving through the shadows while they slept. On March 31st, 1922, everything came to an end. That evening, the family followed their usual routine, unaware it would be their last night alive. One by one, members of the household were lured into the barn, perhaps by the sound of a crying animal or a faint noise. What happened next remains one of the most disturbing scenes in European crime history. Each family member was struck down brutally with a mattock, a type of heavy farming tool. The killer showed no mercy. The attacks were precise and vicious. Inside the house, the maid and the youngest child were also murdered. Their lives ended in the very place that was supposed to keep them safe. But the horror didn't end there. When neighbors grew concerned a few days later, they came to check on the family. What they found left them speechless. The bodies were stacked neatly in the barn, hay covering their faces as though the killer had taken the time to arrange them. Inside, the fire was still burning in the hearth. Food had been eaten and the animals were fed. The killer, or killers, had stayed for days, living in the same house with the dead. To this day, no one knows who did it or why. Some believe it was a drifter who stumbled upon the farm. Others claim it was someone the family knew, perhaps even a relative with a dark motive. A few suggest it was something darker, something not entirely human. The footprints in the snow, the whispers in the attic, and the unseen eyes watching from the shadows. All these details have turned the Hinterkaifeck murders into one of the most chilling unsolved mysteries in history. The farmhouse was eventually demolished, but those who visited the site say the air there still feels heavy, as if the walls that once stood remember everything. After the brutal discovery at Hinterkaifeck, investigators were left with a crime so strange, so unnerving, that it would haunt Germany for generations. What set the case apart wasn't only the violence of the murders, but the eerie precision and intelligence of the person behind them. When police arrived at the scene, they found no signs of forced entry. Every door was locked, every window intact. Whoever had done this didn't break in. They were already inside or had easy access to the home. That revelation sent a chill through investigators and neighbors alike. It meant that the killer might have been someone the Grubers knew, someone who had walked through that door many times before without suspicion. The investigators combed through every inch of the property. They found signs that someone had lived in the house even after the murders. Fresh meals cooked on the stove, animals still fed and milked, and smoke rising from the chimney for days after the killings. It was as if the killer had become part of the household, continuing life as if nothing had happened. Imagine that, a murderer sleeping under the same roof as his victims' bodies, feeding their animals and eating their food. That unsettling detail became the heart of the mystery, suggesting that whoever committed the crime wasn't in a rush to leave. They felt safe there. Over the next few months, the police questioned more than 100 suspects, from neighbors to local laborers and even family members. Some theories pointed toward Lorenz Schlittenbauer, a neighbor who had once been romantically involved with Victoria, the Gruber's daughter. He was one of the first to discover the bodies, and many thought his behavior afterward was suspiciously calm. Others believed the killer might have been a vagrant who had been secretly living in the attic. The same attic where the strange footsteps had been heard weeks earlier. Still, every lead ended the same way, in confusion, doubt, and fear. As time passed, rumors turned the truth into folklore. Some villagers claimed they heard cries from the ruins at night, or saw strange lights glowing where the house once stood. Others whispered that the farm was cursed, that the spirits of the Gruber family still lingered, searching for justice. The case became a dark legend, blending fact and fear until no one could separate the two. Despite countless investigations, confessions, and theories over the years, the Hinterkaifeck murders remain unsolved. Files were lost during World War II, evidence deteriorated, and witnesses passed away. What remains today are fragments, photographs, reports, and a chilling silence that still surrounds the case. More than a century later, it's still one of Germany's deepest mysteries. The story of Hinterkaifeck reminds us that sometimes the scariest monsters aren't ghosts or demons hiding in the dark. They're people living quietly among us, waiting for their moment to strike. It was Christmas Eve, 1945. The air outside the Sodder family home in Fayetteville, West Virginia, was sharp and cold, but inside, warmth filled every corner. The Sodders, a hard-working Italian-American family, were preparing for the holiday. Laughter echoed through the small wooden house as the 9 Sodder children hung stockings by the fire, still buzzing with excitement. But that night, beneath the festive glow, something sinister was already stirring in the dark. At around 12:30 a.m., Jenny Sodder, the mother, awoke to the sound of the telephone ringing. She stumbled out of bed, expecting perhaps a late-night greeting. But when she picked up, a woman's strange voice asked for someone Jenny didn't know, laughing oddly before hanging up. As Jenny returned to bed, she noticed the house was unusually quiet. The lights were still on, and the curtains were open, something her older children normally took care of before sleeping. It was strange, unsettling. But exhaustion won, and she went back to bed. An hour later, Jenny woke again, this time to a far more terrifying sound. A loud thud on the roof, followed by a rolling noise. Moments later, smoke began to fill the air. Flames burst through the hallways, devouring the walls, roaring louder with every second. George and Jenny scrambled to gather their children, pulling them from their beds, shouting their names through the choking smoke. 4 of them made it out, but 5, the oldest girl and 4 younger ones, were trapped upstairs. George tried to reach them, his heart pounding with desperation, but the staircase was engulfed in fire. He ran outside, determined to climb through the window. The family's ladder, which always rested against the side of the house, was missing. He tried using his trucks to reach the upper floor, but bizarrely, both refused to start, even though they worked perfectly earlier that day. Every second felt like eternity, the flames crackling like laughter from something unseen. Within minutes, the house collapsed into ashes. The Sodders stood outside in horror, the night silent except for the hiss of burning wood and the sound of their own screams echoing into the emptiness. When the fire finally died, what was left was devastation and confusion. Firefighters searched the debris, but no bones, no teeth, no human remains were ever found. The official explanation was that the blaze had burned hot enough to completely destroy the bodies, but experts disagreed. Even crematoriums, burning at far higher temperatures for hours, still leave fragments of bone. So where were the children? And then came the clues. The missing ladder was later found tossed down a nearby embankment. The family's phone line had been deliberately cut, not burned. A woman claimed to have seen the missing children watching the fire from a passing car that same night. Others swore they saw them days later, alive, being escorted by strangers in a nearby town. To Jenny and George, the fire was an accident. It was a cover-up. Someone had taken their children and burned their home to erase the truth. But who and why? Each passing year brought more pain, more questions, and no answers. The Sodders rebuilt their lives, but their hearts remained buried in that night of fire and mystery. The Christmas lights never shone the same again. And even now, decades later, the unanswered cries of those 5 children seem to echo through the cold West Virginia hills, a haunting reminder that some disappearances are more than tragedy. They are terror wearing the face of mystery. Years pass, but the flames of that night never stopped burning in Jenny and George Sodder's hearts. While the rest of Fayetteville moved on, the Sodders refused to accept what they were told, that their 5 children had perished in the fire. To them, the story didn't add up. There were too many questions, too many shadows that refused to fade. Jenny became obsessed with finding the truth. She would lie awake every night, staring into darkness, replaying every moment, every sound. How could 5 bodies simply vanish? She began testing things on her own, burning bones of animals in her backyard to see if they would disintegrate. They never did. The evidence didn't lie. But someone else clearly had. The town whispered that the Sodders were delusional, unable to let go. But strange events continued to haunt the family. A woman in St. Louis claimed she had overheard two men talking about the Sodder fire, saying it was said intentionally. Another sighting came from a bar in Charleston, where a waitress swore she saw the missing children accompanied by two well-dressed strangers. And then came the most chilling clue of all, a letter. It arrived in 1967, more than 2 decades after the fire. It was addressed to Jenny with no return address. Inside was a photograph of a young man, around 25 years old. On the back were the words, Louis Sodder, I love Brother Frankie. Illo boys, a 90132 or 35. The handwriting was shaky, the message cryptic, but the face in that photo looked eerily like Louis, one of the missing children. Same eyes, same smile, same features that haunted Jenny's dreams. They hired a private investigator, but he vanished, just like the children. The trail of clues only grew colder and darker. Rumors began swirling that the Sodders had enemies from George's outspoken criticism of Mussolini and fascist Italy. Some believed the fire had been a warning or revenge. Others said the children had been kidnapped by an underground adoption ring. The Sodders put up a billboard near their rebuilt home, a desperate plea for information. It showed the faces of the 5 missing children, and the words, what was their fate? For nearly 40 years. That sign stood as a silent monument to grief and defiance. But answers never came. The strange letter remained the final echo of a truth that slipped away. Whether the photograph was real or part of a cruel hoax, no one ever knew. Jenny kept it close until her final breath, convinced her children were alive somewhere, waiting to be found. And maybe that's what makes the Sodder case so haunting. It isn't just about 5 missing children. It's about the terror of never knowing, the fear that the people you love most can vanish into the night, and the world will simply move on, leaving behind nothing but questions, ashes, an empty Christmas morning that never ends.